Shalom, shalom, shalom. Shalom, everybody. Shalom, everybody, man. Shallow, your boy Shallow in the house. What's the business? We're going to get up in here and read again tonight, baby. Next two laws in the edition of the 48 Laws of Power, laws 23 and 24. The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene, a Joyce Elford's book. Law number 23. Dictionary right here. Concentrate your forces. Concentrate your forces. Let me get everything ready. Law 23. All right. Concentrate your forces. Judgment, to keep them concentrated at their strongest point. You gain more by finding a rich mine and mining it deeper than by flitting from one shallow mine to another. Flitting. Flitting. I guess it means jumping. Flitting, flitting. Flitting, to make sudden. Flitting. To make sudden, brief flights from place to place, to come or go swiftly, the motion of flitting. Intensity defeats extensity every time. When looking for sources of power to elevate you, find the one key patron, the fat cow who will give you milk for a long time to come. Transgression of law. In China, tap me. There we go. In China, in the early 6th century BC, the kingdom of Wu began a war with the neighboring northern provinces of the Middle Kingdom. Wu was a growing power, but it lacked the great history and civilization of the Middle Kingdom, for centuries the center of Chinese culture. By defeating the Middle Kingdom, the king of Wu would instantly raise his status. The war began with great fanfare and several victories, but it soon bogged down. A victory on one front would leave the Wu armies vulnerable to another. The king's chief minister and advisor, Wu Shan, at the barbarous state of Yu to the south, was beginning to notice the kingdom of Wu's problems and had designs to invade. The king only laughed at such worries. One more big victory and the great Middle Kingdom would be his. In the year 490, Wu Hashu sent his son away to safety in the kingdom of Shi. There we go. In doing so, he sent the king a signal that he disapproved of the war and that he believed the king's selfish ambition was leading Wu to ruin. The king, sensing betrayal, lashed out at his minister, accusing him of a lack of loyalty and a lack of loyalty. And in a fit of anger, ordered him to kill himself. Hashu obeyed his king, but before he plunged the knife into his chest, he cried, "Tear out my eyes, O king, and fix them on the gate of Wu, so that I may see the triumphant entry of you." As Hashu had predicted, within a few years of you, army passed beneath the gate of Wu. As the barbarians surrounded the palace, the king remembered his minister's last words and felt the dead man's disembodied eyes watching his disgrace. Unable to bear his shame, the king killed himself, covering his face so that he would not covering his face so that he would not have to meet the reproachful gaze of his minister in the next world. Interpretation. Of all the empires that have come to ruin by overreaching, drunk with success and with ambition, such empires expand to grotesque proportions and meet a which lusted for the faraway island of Sicily ended up losing its empire. The Romans stretched the boundaries of their empire to encompass vast territories. In doing so, they increased their vulnerability and the chances of invasion from yet another barbarian tribe. Their useless expansion led their empire into oblivion. For the Chinese, the fate of the kingdom of Wu serves as an elemental lesson on what happens when you dissipate your forces in several fronts, losing sight of distant dangers for the sake of present gain. If you are not in danger, says Sun Tzu, do not fight. If you are not in danger, says Sun Tzu, do not fight. It is almost a physical law. What is bloated beyond its proportions inevitably collapses. The mind must not wander from goal to goal or be distracted by success from the sense of purpose and proportion. What is concentrated, coherent, and connected to its past has power. What is concentrated, coherent, and connected to its past has power. What is dissipated, divided, and distended rots and falls to the ground. The bigger it bloats, the harder it falls. Observance of the law. The Rothschild banking family had humble beginnings in the Jewish ghetto of Frankfurt, Germany. The city's harsh laws made it impossible for Jews to mingle outside the ghetto. But the Jews had turned this into a virtue. It made them self-reliant, zealous to preserve their culture at all costs. Mayor Amschel, the first of Rothschilds to accumulate wealth by lending money in the late 18th century, was well understood the power that comes from this kind of concentration and cohesion. First, Mayor Amschel allied himself with one family, the powerful princes of Thurn and Thurn taxis. Instead of spreading his services out, he made himself these princes' primary banker. Second, he entrusted none of his businesses to outsiders. Second, he entrusted none of his business to outsiders, using only his children and close relatives. The more unified and tight-knit the family, the more powerful it would become. Soon, Mayor Amschel's 5 sons were running the business. And when Mayor Amschel lay dying in 1812, he refused to name a principal heir, instead setting up all of his sons to continue the family tradition so that they would stay united and would resist the dangers of diffusion and of infiltration by outsiders. Once Mayor Amschel's sons controlled the family business, they decided that the key to wealth on a larger scale was to secure a foothold in the finances of Europe as a whole. Rather than being tied to any one country or prince, of the five brothers, Nathan had already opened up shop in London. In 1813, James moved to Paris. Amschel remained in Frankfurt. Solomon established himself in Vienna, and Karl, the youngest son, went to Naples. With each sphere of influence covered, they could tighten their hold on Europe's financial markets. The widespread network, of course, opened the Rothschilds to the very danger of which their father had warned them: diffusion, division, dissension. They avoided this danger and established themselves as the most powerful force in European finance and politics, by once again resorting to the strategy of the ghetto, excluding outsiders, excluding outsiders, and concentrating their forces. The Rothschilds established the fastest courier system in Europe, allowing them to get news of events before all of their competitors. They held a virtual monopoly on information, and their internal communications and correspondence were written in Frankfurt Yiddish, and in a code that only the brothers could decipher. There was no point in stealing this information. No one could understand it. Even the shrewdest bankers could not find their way through the Rothschilds' maze, admitting a financier who had tried to infiltrate the clan. In 1824, James Rothschild decided it was time to get married. This presented a problem for the Rothschilds, since it meant incorporating an outsider into the Rothschild clan, an outsider who could betray its secrets. This presented a problem for the Rothschild, since it meant incorporating an outsider into the Rothschild clan, an outsider who could betray its secrets. James therefore decided to marry within the family and chose the daughter of his brother Solomon. The brothers were ecstatic. This was the perfect solution to their marriage problems. James' choice now became the family policy. 2 years later, Nathan married off his daughter to Solomon's son. In the years to come, the five brothers arranged 18 matches among their children, 16 of them being contracted between first cousins. We are like the mechanism of a watch. Each part is essential, said Brother Solomon. As in a watch, every part of the business moved in concert with each other. The inner workings were visible to the world, which only saw the movements of the hands, while other rich and powerful families suffered irrecoverable downturns during the tumultuous first half of the 19th century. The tight-knit Rothschilds managed not only to preserve, but to expand their unprecedented wealth. Interpretation. The Rothschilds were born in strange times. They came from a place that had not changed in centuries, but lived in an age that gave birth to the industrial revolution, the French Revolution, and an endless series of upheavals. The Rothschilds kept the past alive, resisting the patterns of dispersion in their era, and for this are emblematic of the law of concentration. Emblematic. I think that got something to do with an emblem or a sign. Emblematic. Emblematic. Hmm. Hmm. I don't know. No one represents this better than James Rothschild, the son who established himself in Paris. In his lifetime, James witnessed the defeat of Napoleon, the restoration of the Bourbon monarchy, the Borgias monarchy of New Orleans. That's not how you pronounce that. Bourbon monarchy. The Borgias monarchy of Orleans, the return to the Republic, and finally, the enthronement of Napoleon III. French styles and fashions changed at a relentless pace during all this turmoil. Without appearing to be a relic of the past, James steered his family as if the ghetto lived on within them. He kept alive his clan's inner cohesion and strength. Only through such an anchoring in the past was the family able to thrive amidst such chaos. Only through such an anchoring in the past was the family able to thrive amidst such chaos. Concentration was the foundation of the Rothschilds' power, wealth, and stability. The best strategy is always to be very strong, first in general, then at a decisive point. There is no higher and simpler law of strategy than that of keeping one's forces concentrated. In short, the first principle is act with utmost concentration on war. Call on Cloud 1780 to 1831. Keys to power. The world is plagued by greater and greater division within countries, political groups, families, even individuals. We are all in a state of total distraction and diffusion, hardly able to keep our minds in one direction before we are pulled in a thousand others. The modern world's level of conflict is higher than ever, and we have internalized it in our lives. The solution is a form of retreat inside ourselves, to the past, to more concentrated forms of thought and action. As Schopenhauer wrote, intellect is a magnitude of intensity, not a magnitude of extensity. Napoleon knew the value of concentrating your force at the enemy's weakest spot. It was the secret of his success on the battlefield. But his willpower and his mind were equally molded in this notion. Single-mindedness of purpose, total concentration on the goal, and the use of these qualities against people less focused, people in a state of distraction. Such an arrow will find its mark every time and overwhelm the enemy. Casanova attributed his success in life to his ability to concentrate on a single goal and push it until it yielded. It was his ability to give himself over completely to the woman he desired that made him so intensely seductive. For the weeks or months that one of these women lived in his orbit, he thought of no one else. When he was imprisoned in the Venice, a prison from which no one had ever escaped, he concentrated his mind on a single goal of escape, day after day. A change of cells, which meant that months of digging had all been for naught, did not discourage him. He persisted and eventually escaped. I have always believed, he later wrote, that when a man gets it into his head to do something, and when he exclusively occupies himself in that design, he must succeed, whatever the difficulties. The man will become Grand Vizier or Pope. That man will become Grand Vizier or Pope. Concentrate on a single goal, a single task, and beat it into submission. In the world of power, you will constantly need help from other people. In the world of power, you will constantly need help from other people. Usually those more powerful than you. The fool flits from one person to another, believing that he will survive this by spreading himself out. It is corally, it is a, let's look it up. Let's look it up. Let's look it up. Corally. Colliery. It is colliery. It is a corollary. It is a corollary. Corollary. Corolllary. Corollary. Nope, it's not it. Corollary. Corollary. A proposition that can be inferred from one already proved as self-evidently true. A natural consequence or result. Corollary. Still not sounding right. It's a corollary of the law of concentration. However, that much energy is saved and more power is attained by affixing yourself to a single appropriate source of power. The scientist Nikola Tesla ruined himself by believing that he somehow maintained his independence by not having to serve a single master. He even turned down J.P. Morgan, who offered him a rich contract. In the end, Tesla's independence meant that he could depend on no single patron, but was always having to toady up to a dozen of them. Later in his life, he realized his mistake. All the great Renaissance painters and writers wrestled with this problem. None more so than the 16th century writer Pietro Artino. Throughout his life, Artino suffered the indignities of having to please this prince and that for the services of his powerful pen. He finally discovered the freedom that came from attachment to a single source of power. Michelangelo found this freedom with Pope Julius II. Galileo with Medicius. In the end, Medicus. In the end, the single patron appreciates your loyalty and becomes dependent on your services. In the long run, the master serves the slave. Finally, power itself always exists in concentrated forms. Power itself always exists in concentrated forms. In any organization, it is inevitable for a small group to hold the strings, and often it is not those with the titles. In the game of power, only the fool flails about without fixing his target. You must find out who controls the operations, who is the real director behind the scenes. As Richelieu discovered at the beginning of his rise to the top of the French political scene during the early 17th century, it was not King Louis XIII who decided things. It was the king's mother. And so he attached himself to her and catapulted through the ranks of courtiers all the way to the top. It is enough to strike oil once. Your wealth and power are assured for a lifetime. Image, the arrow. You cannot hit two targets with one arrow. If your thoughts stray, you miss the enemy's heart. Mind and arrow must become one. Only with such concentration of mental and physical power can your arrow hit the target and pierce the heart. Authority, prize intensity more than extensity. Perfection resides in quality, not quantity. Perfection resides in quality and not quantity. Extent alone never rises above mediocrity. And it is the misfortune of men with wide general interests that while they would like to have their fingers in every pie, they have one in none. And it is the misfortune of men with wide general interests that they would like to have their fingers in every pie. They have one in none. Intensity gives eminence and rises to the heroic in matters sublime. Balthazar Gracian, 1601 to 1658. The reversal. There are dangers in concentration and moments when dispersion is the proper tactical move. Fighting the nationalists for control of China, Mao Zedong and the communists fought a protracted war on several fronts, using sabotage and ambush as their main weapons. Dispersal is often suitable for the weaker side. It is, in fact, a crucial principle of guerrilla warfare. When fighting a strong army, concentrating your forces only makes you as an easier target. Better to dissolve into the scenery and frustrate your enemy with the elusiveness of your presence. Tying yourself to a single source of power has one preeminent danger. If that person dies, leaves, or falls from grace, you suffer. This is what happened to Caesar Borgia, who derived his power from his father, Pope Alexander. Pope Alexander IV. It was the Pope who gave Caesar armies to fight with and wars to wage in his name. When he suddenly died, perhaps from poison, Caesar was as good as dead. He had made far too many enemies over the years and was now without his father's protection. In cases when you may need protection, then it is often wise to entwine yourself around several sources of power. Such a move would be especially prudent in periods of great tumult and violent change. Tumult and violent change. It is often wise to entwine yourself around several sources of power. Such a move would be especially prudent in periods of great tumult and violent change. Or when your enemies are numerous. The more patrons and masters you serve, the less risk you run if one of them falls from power. Such dispersion will even allow you to play one off against another. Even if you concentrate on a single source of power, you will still practice caution and prepare for the day when your master or patron is no longer there to help you. Finally, being too single-minded in purpose can make you an intolerable bore, especially in the arts. The Renaissance painter, uh, Paulo Polo Ucello, probably not pronouncing it right, was so obsessed with perspective that his paintings looked lifeless and contrived. When Leonardo da Vinci interested himself in everything, whereas Leonardo da Vinci interested himself in everything: architecture, painting, warfare, sculpture, mechanics. Diffusion was the source of his power, but such genius was rare, and the rest of us are better off erring on the side of intensity. That was Law 23. Concentrate your forces. Law 24. Play the perfect courtier. Judgment. All right. The perfect courtier thrives in a world where everything revolves around power and political dexterity. He has mastered the art of indirection. He flatters, yields to superiors, and asserts power over others in the most oblique and graceful manner. Learn and apply the laws of courtship, and there will be no limit to how far you can rise in the court. Ooh-wee. 1, 2. Oh boy. We'll see. Court society. It is a fact of human nature that the structure of a court society forms itself around power. In the past, the court gathered around the ruler and had many functions. Besides keeping the ruler amused, it was a way to solidify the hierarchy of royalty, nobility, and the upper classes, and to keep the nobility both subordinate and close to the ruler, so that he could keep an eye on them. The court serves power in many ways, but most of all, it glorifies the ruler, providing him with a microscopic world that must struggle to please him. To be a courtier was a dangerous game. A 19th century Arab traveler to the court of Darfur in what is now Sudan reported that the courtiers there had to do whatever the Sultan did. If he were injured, they had to suffer the same injury. Shit. If he fell off the horse during the hunt, they fell. Mimicry like this appeared in courts all over the world. More troublesome was the danger of displeasing the ruler. One wrong move spelled death or exile. The successful courtier had to walk a tightrope, pleasing but not pleasing too much, obeying, but somehow distinguishing himself from the other courtiers, while also never distinguishing himself so far as to make the ruler insecure. Great courtiers throughout history have mastered the science of manipulating people. They make the king feel more kingly. They make everyone else feel fear their power. They are magicians of appearance, knowing that knowing they are magicians of appearance, knowing that most things at the court are judged by how they seem. Most things at court are judged by how they seem. Great courtiers are gracious and polite. Their aggression is veiled and indirect. Masters of words, they never say more than necessary, getting the most out of the compliment or hidden insult. They are magnets of pleasure. People want to be around them because they know how to please, yet they neither fawn nor humiliate themselves. Great courtiers become the king's favorite, enjoying the benefits of that position. They often end up more powerful than the ruler. For they are wizards in the acclamation of influence. Many today dismiss court life as a relic of the past, a hysterical curiosity. They reason, according to Machiavelli, as though heaven, the sun, the elements, and man had changed the order of their motions and power and were different from what they were in ancient times. As though heaven, the sun, the elements, and men had changed the order of their motions and power, and power, and were different from what they were in ancient times. There may be no more sun kings, but there is still plenty of people who believe the sun revolves around them. The royal court may have more or less disappeared, or at least lost its power, but courts and courtiers still exist because power still exists. A courtier is rarely asked to fall off a horse anymore, but the laws that govern court politics are as timeless as laws of power. There is much to be learned, then, for the great courtiers past and present. The laws of court politics. Avoid ostentation. Avoid ostentation. No more water. It is never prudent. Oh shit. It is never prudent all this shit. Clean this shit up real quick. All on my book. All on my book. It is never prudent to prattle on about yourself or call too much attention to your actions. The more you talk about your deeds, the more suspicion you cause. You also stir up enough envy among your peers to induce treachery and backstabbing. Be careful, ever so careful, in trumpeting your own achievements, and always talk less about yourself than about other people. Modesty is generally preferable. Practice nonchalance. Never seem to be working too hard. Your talent must appear to flow naturally, with an ease that makes people take you for a genius rather than a workaholic. Even when something demands a lot of sweat, make it look effortless. People prefer to see, excuse me, people prefer not to see your blood and toil, which is another form of ostentation. Let's make that word up. It is better for them to marvel at how gracefully you have achieved your accomplishment than to wonder why it took so much work. Be frugal with flattery. It may seem that your superiors cannot get enough flattery, but too much of even a good thing loses its value. It also stirs up suspicion among your peers. Learn to flatter indirectly by downplaying your own contribution. For example, to make your master look better. Arrange to be noticed. There's a paradox. You cannot display yourself too brazenly, yet you must also get yourself noticed. In the court of Louis XIV, whoever the king decided to look at rose instantly in the court hierarchy. You stand no chance of rising if the ruler does not notice you in the swamp of courtiers. This task requires much art. It is often initially a matter of being with quality, the idea that talking and acting the same way with everyone, no matter what their rank, makes you somehow a paragon of civilization, is a terrible mistake. Those below you will take it as a form of condensation. Not condensation. Condescension. A form of condescension. Think on it. Which it is. And those above you will be offended. Although they may not admit it, you must change your style and your way of speaking to suit each person. This is not lying, it is acting. And acting is an art, not a gift from God. Learn the art. This is also true for the great variety, of cultures found in the modern court. Never assume that your criteria of behavior and judgment are universal. Not only is an inability to adapt to another culture the height of barbarism, it puts you at a disadvantage. Never be a bearer of bad news. Shit. Never be the bearer of bad news. The king kills the messenger who brings bad news. This is a cliche, but there is truth to it. You must struggle and, if necessary, lie and cheat to be sure that the lot of the bearer of bad news falls on a colleague and never on you. Bring only good news, and your approach will gladden your master. Come that old good movie telling nigga. Never affect friendliness and intimacy with your master. Oh, that's a good one to follow. He does not want a friend for a subordinate. He wants a subordinate. Never approach him in an easy, friendly way or act as if you are on the best of terms. That is his prerogative. If he chooses to deal with you on this level, assume a worried chumness. Otherwise, err in the opposite direction and make the distance between you clear. Never criticize above you directly. This may seem obvious, but there are often times when some sort of criticism is necessary. To say nothing or to give no advice would open you to risks of another sort. You must learn, however, to couch your advice, Be frugal in asking those above you for favors, for real. Nothing irritates a master more than having to reject someone's request. It stirs up guilt and resentment. Ask for favors as rarely as possible and know when to stop. Rather than making yourself the supplicant, it is always better to earn your favors so that the ruler bestows them willingly. Most important, do not ask for favors on another person's behalf, lest of all of friends. Never joke about appearances or taste. But avoid any kind of joke about appearance or taste. Two highly sensitive areas, especially with those above you. Do not even try it when you are away from them. You will dig your own grave. Don't be the court cynic. Express admiration for the good work of others. If you constantly criticize your equals or subordinates, some of that criticism will rub off on you, hovering over you like a great cloud wherever you go. People will groan at each new cynical comment, and you will irritate them. By expressing modest admiration for other people's achievements, you paradoxically call attention to your own. The ability to express wonder and amazement and seem like you mean it is a rare and dying talent, but one still greatly valued. Be self-observant. The mirror is a miraculous invention. Without it, you would commit great sins against beauty and decorum. You also need a mirror for your actions. This can sometimes come from other people telling you what they see in you. But that is not the most trustworthy method. You must be the mirror, training your mind to try to see yourself. Are you trying too hard to please? Do you seem desperate for attention, giving the impression that you are on the decline? Be observant about yourself, and you will avoid a mountain of blunders. Master your emotions. That's the big one. As an actor in a great play, you must learn to cry and laugh on command, and when it is appropriate. You must be able to do both. You must be able to both to distinguish your anger and frustration and to fake your contentment and agreement. You must be the master of your own face. Call it lying if you like, but if you prefer to not play the game and to always be honest and upfront, don't complain when others call you obnoxious and arrogant. Fit the spirit of the times. I don't know about that one. A slight affection of the past era can be charming, as long as you choose a period at least 20 years back. Wearing the fashions of 10 years ago is ludicrous. Unless you enjoy the role of the court jester. Your spirit, the way of thinking must keep up with the times, even if the times offend your sensibilities. Yeah. No, I'm not keeping up with the times. Be too forward thinking, however, and no one will understand you. It is never a good idea to stand out too much in this area. You are best off at least being able to mimic the spirit of the times. All right, now. Be a source of pleasure. This is critical. It is an obvious law of human nature that we will flee what is unpleasant and distasteful, while charm and the promise of delight will draw us like moths to a flame. Make yourself the flame and you will rise to the top. Since life is otherwise so full of unpleasantness and pleasure so scarce, you will be as indispensable as food and drink. This may seem obvious, but what is obvious is often ignored and unappreciated. There are degrees to this. Not everyone can play the role of favorite, for not everyone is blessed with charm and wit. But we can all control our unpleasant qualities and obscure them when necessary. Of his face, he is profound, impenetrable. He dissimulates bad offices, smiles at his enemies, controls his irritation, disguises passions, belies his heart, speaks and acts against his feelings. Jean de Bruyere, Jean or Jean de la Bruyere, 1645 to 1696. Scenes of court life. Exemplary deeds and fatal mistakes. Scene 1. Woo-woo. Woo-woo. This way it started getting hard for me. Man. This way it started getting hard for me. We'll push them. We'll push them. Scene 1. Alexander the Great, conqueror of the Mediterranean basin in the Middle East through to India, had the great Aristotle as his tutor and mentor. And throughout his short life, he remained devoted to philosophy and his master's teachings. He once complained to Aristotle that during his long campaigns, he had no one with whom he could discuss philosophical matters. Aristotle responded by suggesting that he take Callisthenes, a former pupil of Aristotle and a promising philosopher in his own right, along on his next campaign. Aristotle had schooled Callisthenes in the skills of being a courtier, but the young man secretly scoffed at them. He believed in pure philosophy, in unadorned words, in speaking the naked truth. If Alexander loved learning so much, Callisthenes thought, he could not object to one who spoke his mind. During one of Alexander's major campaigns, Callisthenes spoke his mind one too many times, and Alexander had him put to death. Shit. Interpretation. In court, honesty is a fool's game. Never be so self-absorbed as to believe that the master is interested in your criticism of him, no matter how accurate they are. Scene number 2. Beginning in the Han Dynasty 2,000 years ago, Chinese scholars compiled a series of writing called 21 Histories. an official biography of each dynasty, including stories, statistics, census figures, and war chronicles. Each history also contained a chapter using unusual events. Contained a chapter called Unusual Events. And here, among the listings of earthquakes and floods, there would sometimes suddenly appear descriptions of such bizarre manifestations as two-headed sheep, geese flying backwards, stars suddenly appearing in different parts of the sky, and so on. The earthquakes could be historically verified, but the monsters and weird natural phenomena were clearly inserted on purpose and invariably occurred in clusters. What could this mean? The Chinese emperor was considered more than a man. He was a force of nature. His kingdom was the center of the universe, and everything revolved around him. He embodied the world's perfection. To criticize him or any of his actions would have been to criticize the divine order. The minister or courtier dared approach the emperor with even the slightest cautionary word, but emperors were fallible, and the kingdom suffered greatly by the mistakes. Inserting sightings of strange phenomenon into the court chronicles was the only way to warn them. Ooh-wee. Man, oh man. I'm feeling it now. I'm feeling it now. The emperor would read the geese flying backward and the moons out of orbit and realize that he was being cautioned. His actions were unbalanced, unbalancing the universe, and needed to change. Interpretation. Chinese courtiers. The problem is how to give the emperor advice. The problem of how to give the emperor advice was an important issue. Over the years, thousands of them had died trying to warn or counsel their master. To be made safely, their criticism had to be indirect. Yet if they were too indirect, they would not have heeded. Man, I wouldn't have wanted to be alive back then. And people think they got it bad now. Yet, if they are too indirect, they would not be heeded. The chronicles were their solution. Identify no one person as the source of criticism. Make the advance as impersonal as possible. But let the emperor know the gravity of the situation. Your master is no longer the center of the universe, but he still imagines that everything revolves around him. When you criticize him, he sees the person criticizing, not the criticism itself. Like the Chinese courtiers, you must find a way to disappear behind the warning. Use symbols and other indirect methods to paint a picture of problems to come without putting your neck on the line. Oh man. Oh man. All right. Moving. Scene number 3. Early in his career, the French architect Jules received commissions to design minor additions to the Versailles for King Louis XIV. For each design, he would draw up his plans, making sure they followed Louis' instructions closely. He would then present them to His Majesty. The courtier, Saint Simon, described Mansart's technique in dealing with the king. His particular skill was to show the king plans that purposely included something imperfect about them. often dealing with the gardens, which were not Mansard's specialty. The king, as Mansard expected, would put his finger exactly on the problem, and propose how to solve it. At which point Mansard would exclaim for all to hear that he would never have seen the problem, that the king had so masterfully found it and solved. He would burst with admiration, confessing that next to the king, he was but a lowly pupil. Woo-wee. Man, that sleep monster. That's what I call it. That sleep monster. Woo-wee. Sometime he get on me, man. Sleep monster. The king, as Mansard expected, would put his finger exactly on the problem and propose how to solve it. At which point Mansard would exclaim for all to hear that he would have never seen the problem that the king had so masterfully found and solved. He would burst with admiration, confessing that next to the king, he had a prestigious royal commission. Although he was less talented and experienced than a number of other French designers, he was to take charge of the enlargement of Versailles. He was the king's architect from now on. Interpretation. As a young man, Mansard had seen how many royal craftsmen in the services of Louis XIV had lost their position not through lack of talent, but through a costly social blunder. He would not make that mistake. Mansard also strove to make Louis feel better about himself and to feed the king's vanity as publicly as possible. Oh, man. I guess that's what I get for trying to read at 3:25 in the morning. Never imagine uh, that skill or talent are all that matter. In court, the courtier's art is more important than his talent. Never spend so much time on your studies that you neglect your social skills. And the greatest skill of all is the ability to make the master look more talented than those around him. Whoo, man, come on, my boy. You can do it. Scene 5. Woo. Jean-Baptiste Isabey had become an unofficial painter of the Napoleonic court. Ooh. Oh man. Jean-Baptiste Isabey had been an unofficial team after Napoleon defeated had been imprisoned on the island of Elba. The participants in this meeting, which were to decide the fate of Europe, invited Isabey to immortalize the historic event in an epic painting. Oh man, throw some water in my face. Shit. Now my body telling me it's tired. Whew. When Isabey arrived to Vienna, Talleyrand, the main negotiator for the French, paid the artist a visit. Considering his role in the proceedings, the statement explained he expected to occupy center stage in the painting. Isabey cordially agreed. A few days later, the Duke of Wellington, the main negotiator for the English, also approached Isabey and said much the same thing that Talleyrand had. Attention. Back in his studio, Isabey pondered the dilemma. If he gave the spotlight to either of the two men, he could create a diplomatic rift, stirring up all sorts. Stirring up all sorts of resentment at the time when peace and concord were critical. Oh man, I'm going down for the count, baby. I'm going down. I'm going down. Still got 3 pages. Shit. When the paintings was finally unveiled, however, both Talleyrand and Wellington felt honored and satisfied. The work depicts a large hall filled with diplomats and politicians from all over Europe. On one side, the Duke of Wellington enters the room, and all eyes turned on him. He is the center of attention. In the very center of the painting, meanwhile, sits Talleyrand. Interpretation. It is often very difficult to satisfy the master, but to satisfy 2 masters in one stroke, such predicaments are common in the life of a courtier. By giving attention to one master, he displeases another. You must find a way to navigate this Sicily, this Scylla, and Charybdis safely. Master must receive their due. Never inadvertently stir up the resentment of one pleasuring or pleasing another. I'm telling you, man, I'm so tired right now. It made me want to kick my heels. All right. Scene 5. George Brummel, also known as Beau Brummel, made his mark in the late 1700s by the supreme elegance of his appearance. His popularization of shoe buckles, soon imitated by all the dandies, and his clever way with words. His London house was the fashionable spot in town, and Brummel was the authority on all matters of fashion. If he disliked your footwear, he immediately got rid of it and bought whatever he was wearing. He perfected the art of tying a cravat. Lord Byron was said to spend many a night in front of a mirror trying to figure out the secret behind Brummel's perfect knots. One of Brummel's greatest admirers was the Prince of Wales, who fancied himself a fashionable young man. Becoming attached to the prince's court and provided with a royal pension, Brummel was soon so sure of his own authority there that he took to joking about the prince's weight, referring to his host as Big Ben. Since trimness of figure was an important quality for a dandy, this was a withering criticism. At dinner once, when the service was slow, Brumel said to the prince, "Do ring, Big Ben." The prince rang, but when the valet arrived, he ordered the man to show Brumel to the door and never admit him again. Despite falling into the prince's disfavor, Brumel continued to treat everyone around him with the same arrogance. Without the Prince of Wales' patronage to support him, he sank into horrible debt, but he maintained his insolent manners, and everyone soon abandoned him. He died in the most pitiable, man, pitiable poverty, alone and deranged. Brumel's devastating wit was one of the qualities that endeared him to the Prince of Wales, but not even he, the arbiter of taste and fashion, could get away with the joke about the prince's appearance, least of all to his face. Never joke about a person's plumpness, even indirectly, and particularly when he is your master. The poorhouses of history are filled with people who have made such jokes to their masters in their masters' expenses. Come on, my boy. Oh, I'm trying to read fast. I'm trying to read fast. I'm trying to read. Scene number 6. Yeah, scene number 6. Pope Urban. Pope Urban VIII wanted to be remembered for his skill in writing poetry, which unfortunately were mediocre at best. In 1629, Duke Francisco the Duke Francesco d'Este, knowing the Pope's literary pretensions, sent the poet Fluvio Testius, his ambassador to the Vatican. One of Testi's letters to the Duke reveals why he was chosen. Once our discussion was over, I kneeled to depart, but His Holiness made a signal and walked to another room where he sleeps. And after reaching a small table, he grabbed a bundle of papers, and thus, turning to me with a smiling face, he said, "We want your lordship to listen to some of our compositions." And in fact, he read me 2 very long Pindaric poems, one in praise to the most Matilda. Oh man, excuse me, my bad, man. We do not know exactly what Testi thought of these very long poems, since it would have been dangerous for him to state his opinion freely, even in a letter. But he went on to write. I following the mood, commented each line with the needed praise. After having kissed His Holiness's foot for such an unusual sign of benevolence, the reading of the poetry, I left. Weeks later, when the Duke himself visited the Pope, he managed to recite entire verses of the Pope's poetry and praised it enough to make the Pope so jubilant he seemed to lose his mind. Interpretation. In matters of taste, you can never be too obsequious with your master. Taste is one of the ego's prickliest parts. Never impugn or question the master's taste. His poetry is sublime, his dress is impeccable, and his manners are a model for all. Oh, man. Scene 7. One afternoon in ancient China, Chao, ruler of Han from 358 to 333 BC, got drunk and fell asleep in the palace gardens. The court crown keeper, whose sole task was to look after ruler's apparel, passed through the gardens and saw his master sleeping without a coat. Since it was getting cold, the crown keeper placed his own coat over the ruler and left. When Ko awoke, he saw the coat upon him. He asked his attendants, "Who put more clothes on my body?" The crown keeper, they replied. The ruler immediately called for his official coat keeper and had him punished for neglecting his duties. He also called for the crown keeper, whom he had beheaded. Interpretation. Do not overstep your bounds. Do what you are assigned to do, to the best of your abilities, and never do more. To think that by doing more you are doing better is a common blunder. It is never good to seem to be trying too hard. It is as if you are covering up some deficiency. Fulfilling a task that has not been asked of you just make people suspicious. Yeah, fulfilling a task that hasn't been asked of you makes people suspicious. If you are a keeper, a crown keeper, be a crown keeper. See your excess energy, save your excess energy for when you are not in the court. Man, my reading is getting worse and worse. I can feel it. I got 2 more pages. 2 more pages. 2 more pages and we done. Oh man. It's getting rough though. Scene number 8. Scene number 8. One day, for amusement, the Italian Renaissance painter Fra Filippo Lippi from 1406 to 1469 and some friends were sailing in a small boat off Ancona. There they were captured by 2 Moorish galleys, which hauled them off in chains to Barbary, where they were sold as slaves. For 18 long months, Filippo toiled with no hope of returning to Italy. On several occasions, Filippo saw the man who had brought him pass by. And one day he decided to sketch this man's portrait using burnt coal, charcoal from the fire. Still in his chains, he found a white wall where he drew a full-length likeness of his owner in Moorish clothing. The owner soon heard about this, for no one had seen such skill in drawing before in these parts. Man. Ooh-wee. Ooh, man, all these yawns, man. I'm killing myself. These yawns is hurting me. These yawns is hurting myself. The owner soon heard about this, for no one had seen such skill in drawing before in these parts. It seemed like a miracle, a gift from God. The drawing so pleased the owner that he instantly gave Filippo his freedom and employed him in his court. All the big men on the Barbary coast came to see the magnificent color portraits that Fra Filippo had proceeded to do. And finally, in gratitude for the honor in this way brought upon him, Filippo's owner returned the artist safely to Italy. Interpretation. We who toil for other people have all in some way been captured by pirates and sold into slavery. But like Fra Filippo, if to a lesser degree, most of us possess some gifts, some talent, an ability to do something better than other people. Make your master a gift of your talent, and you will rise above other quarters. Let him take the credit if necessary. It will only be temporary. Use him as a stepping stone, a way of displaying your talent and eventually buying your freedom from enslavement. Oh man. Scene number 9. Alfonso I of Aragon once had a servant who told the king that the night before he had had a dream. Alfonso had given him a gift of weapons, horses, and clothes. Alfonso, a generous, lordly man, decided it would be amusing to make his dream come true and promptly gave the servant exactly these gifts.